His clothes were from the 1930s, his watch had stopped ticking, but the most terrifying thing was that he insisted the war had not yet begun. The man stood beneath the flickering fluorescent lights of a modern New York subway platform, staring at the digital advertisement screens as if they were alien artifacts, his eyes tracing the sharp glow of colors that did not belong to his world. Commuters had frozen at a distance, whispering, filming, laughing nervously, assuming it was some kind of performance art, until he turned and asked a passing teenager, with complete sincerity, whether President Roosevelt had managed to keep America out of the coming storm in Europe, and the laughter died in everyone's throat because there was no irony in his voice, no confusion in his posture, only a calm, grounded certainty that made the air feel heavier. Transit police arrived within minutes, guiding him gently but firmly into a restricted corridor, questioning him under sterile LED lights where he gave his name as Thomas Calder, born 1912, employed as a junior accountant at a brokerage firm that had ceased to exist before any of the officers were born, and when shown his reflection in a smartphone screen, he recoiled not from his own face but from the device itself, whispering that the glass was glowing without flame. Fingerprints were taken and run through databases, returning no match, facial recognition found nothing, dental records yielded silence, and yet every detail of his attire, from the stitching on his lapels to the mint-condition 1934 mercury dime in his coat pocket, checked out as authentic to the period, untouched by artificial aging. Dr. Evelyn Harper, a temporal cognition specialist often consulted in extreme dissociative cases, was called in to evaluate him, expecting schizophrenia, perhaps elaborate delusion, but what she found instead unsettled her in ways she could not immediately articulate, because Thomas did not ramble or contradict himself. He described his morning commute in 1937 with sensory precision. The newspaper headlines about labor strikes, the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor long dead, the tremor of anxiety about rumors of war overseas, and when she attempted to disorient him with modern references, he listened carefully, absorbing information without panic, as if she were the confused one. Meanwhile, historians consulted by the city discovered that Thomas Calder had indeed existed, listed in archived census data, declared missing in April 1937 after reportedly entering the City Hall subway station late one evening and never emerging. His disappearance a minor footnote in a year crowded with global tensions, and as this revelation circulated through official channels, the sterile hospital room where Thomas now sat began to feel less like a psychiatric ward and more like the center of something unexplainable. Security footage from the subway was analyzed frame by frame, revealing a momentary distortion at the far end of the platform just seconds before Thomas appeared. A subtle ripple in the air like heat above asphalt, lasting less than a blink, and engineers argued over camera glitches while physicists from Columbia University requested access to the raw files, whispering theories about quantum anomalies and gravitational shear. Thomas himself grew increasingly distressed not by captivity but by the sky he could not see, asking repeatedly why the city sounded different, why the cars outside roared like mechanical beasts without visible exhaust plumes, why the skyline pierced the clouds with impossible towers of glass, and when finally shown a live broadcast mentioning the Second World War as history, his composure fractured for the first time. His hands trembling as he whispered that it had not happened yet, that millions were not supposed to be dead, that none of it had begun. Dr. Harper leaned closer, asking what he meant, and Thomas described descending the steps into the City Hall station in 1937 during a violent thunderstorm, lightning cracking overhead, the lights flickering in rhythmic pulses, and as he reached the final step he felt an immense pressure in his ears as though submerged underwater, followed by silence so complete it erased even his own heartbeat, and then the world snapped back with a brightness that hurt his eyes, the tiles cleaner, the air sharper, the advertisements wrong. He had assumed at first that he was ill, that perhaps he had fainted and awoken hours later, but the people emerging from the trains wore fabrics he did not recognize, carried glowing rectangles in their hands, and spoke casually of events decades beyond his comprehension. And it was at that moment he realized something impossible had occurred, something that had not merely displaced him in space but in time itself. And as the storm outside intensified against the hospital windows, scientists prepared to examine the original station site for anomalies, unaware that the ripple caught on camera had begun to widen, subtle but growing, as if the fabric of reality had only just begun to tear. By the third night of Thomas Calder's confinement, Instruments placed within the abandoned City Hall station began registering electromagnetic fluctuations that pulsed in patterns eerily similar to a heartbeat, and a joint task force of physicists and federal authorities sealed off the surrounding blocks, constructing a temporary research facility underground where the air felt charged with static. Thomas, brought to the site under heavy escort, grew pale as they descended the familiar curved stairway, his breathing shallow, insisting that the tiles were wrong again, that something was shifting beneath the surface like a reflection trying to break free. And when the team activated high-resolution scanners, the distortion appeared once more at the far end of the platform, no longer subtle but visible as a trembling shimmer bending the fluorescent light into warped halos. Dr. Harper, torn between scientific awe and primal fear, asked Thomas to step closer to describe exactly what he had felt in 1937, and as he approached the distortion, his stopwatch began ticking again for the first time since his arrival, each metallic click echoing through the chamber in unnatural amplification. And suddenly the shimmer expanded into a corridor of fractured images, flashes of 1930s commuters overlapping with modern researchers, two eras occupying the same coordinates in unstable superposition. Through the flickering veil, Thomas could see his own past self standing at the base of the staircase in the thunderstorm moments before stepping forward, and the implication struck the physicists with terrifying clarity that time was not a line but a layered surface capable of folding under extreme conditions. Perhaps triggered by the rare convergence of geomagnetic activity recorded during the storm of April 14, 1937, an event nearly identical to the solar flare that had occurred 72 hours earlier. Alarms blared as equipment overloaded, sparks raining from ceiling panels, and within the distortion shadowy outlines of people from different decades appeared disoriented and silent, as if countless near misses had occurred throughout history without anyone realizing. And Thomas understood with sudden, crushing insight that he was not meant to remain in this era because his presence was destabilizing the boundary between layers, each passing hour increasing the amplitude of the anomaly. Dr. Harper faced an impossible decision as the corridor widened enough to reveal the storm-drenched 1937 platform clearly, rain visible at the staircase entrance, the younger Thomas hesitating before his final step, and she realized that if present Thomas re-entered at the precise temporal coordinate he had exited, the loop might seal itself, restoring continuity, but it would mean sending him back to a world on the brink of global catastrophe, erasing any knowledge he had gained of the horrors ahead. Thomas, tears forming but posture steady, whispered that perhaps history required ignorance to unfold, that foreknowledge might fracture more than it healed, and without waiting for authorization, he stepped toward the luminous threshold as the ticking of his watch synchronized with the electromagnetic pulses, the distortion tightening around him like a closing fist, and for one suspended instant both versions of Thomas locked eyes across decades before merging in a blinding flash that knocked every observer to the ground. When the light collapsed, the platform stood empty and silent, equipment fried, the shimmer gone as though it had never existed, and in the stunned quiet, Dr. Harper checked her tablet to confirm the historical record, her breath catching when she saw that Thomas Calder was no longer listed as missing in 1937 but recorded as having died peacefully in 1982. A retired accountant who had lived an unremarkable life, married, raised children, never once mentioning a journey through time. Yet in the pocket of Dr. Harper's lab coat, she later discovered the 1934 mercury dime he had carried, warm to the touch and impossibly out of place, suggesting that while the loop had closed, it had not sealed perfectly, and somewhere in the layered architecture of reality faint ripples still moved beneath the surface, waiting for another storm, another convergence, another man out of time.